Hello everyone and welcome to the Forgotten Generation podcast, first ever Summit Month in a run-up to Iowa Week 2025. This month is all about celebrating and spotlighting amazing young people's journeys in their social action and youth voice, local and national levels to drive change. With me in today's TFG Summit Month episode, it's two Iowa ambassadors, Molly and Finlay. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves, age and what is your youth social action, and describe one word about your social action? So we'll start with Molly first.
Hello everyone, thank you Troy so much for having us on for this very special episode, and I hope everyone's gearing up for Iowa Week. So my name's Molly and my age, I'm 25, pushing it now. My youth social action that a lot of people sort of recognise me for, I should say, and how I became an I Will ambassador was actually through campaigning on youth loneliness, which is a really important issue that's close to my heart. But I realised that actually, like a lot of young people and a lot of ambassadors, actually, we've started from a much younger age. So I would say that actually I started social action without realising it when I was in my early youth. And one word, I really couldn't find a unique word, but I'm just going to say belonging. And I think that's ironic because when I was campaigning on loneliness, obviously I felt incredibly lonely, but through that I also found community and belonging, and that was what I was trying to achieve. So yeah, my one word is belonging. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much, Molly, for your intro. Finlay, what about you?
Yeah, thank you, Troy. Hello, everyone. My name's Finlay. I'm another I Will ambassador, and I'm now 20 years old, which again, is unbelievable, and it's a scary number. And I'm from Scotland, more specifically, a place that no one's ever heard of in Dumfries and Galloway, in the southwest of Scotland. So if you're from there, great, lovely. Um, my social action, mainly kind of centers on advocacy. And so that relates, often to disability awareness and, children and young people's rights. And, I've did that in a number of ways, whether it's youth participation, whether it's my role as a, charity trustee on, charity boards. And then, more recently and, in the role that's taken up the most of my time as a member of, or a panel member within the children's hearing system in Scotland. If I could describe, my social action in one word, that word would be change. And I think there's two limbs to that. And, the first one is, making positive change and making a difference to my community and other communities. And then, the second limb to that of a realization that I've had myself, and that my own social action has changed as I've did more of it. And, it's changed in the form of roles and the goals that I have in engaging with different organizations and different opportunities. And then also the responsibilities that come with those as well. And so, it's been a lot of change and a lot of good change, thankfully.
Wow, an amazing intro. Thanks so much, Finlay. So lovely to have both of you guys on today's Summit Month episode. What makes you inspired to have a voice locally and nationally in your community? That is the first question. So we'll start with Finlay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love having a voice. I need to start off with saying that it makes such a difference having a voice. I can look back and remember a time where I didn't have one. You know, it was my experience that in secondary school, in order to get the support that I needed, there's decisions that were being made, but about me by professionals that that weren't in my best interest and that didn't consider my voice or my views or my experiences or the things that I wanted to achieve and do. And so I think, a big part of, why I feel inspired, to have a voice locally and nationally, is part of, my own experiences. And, that's definitely, one of the roots that that started my kind of journey and it inspired me into my journey. But I also think, being able to kind of see the positive impact that, collective voices and collective advocacy can have, when it comes to influence and decision making at all sorts of levels, whether it is local or national, is something that continues to inspire me, and it's something that, is just so incredible. Yeah.
I absolutely agree on what you said, Finlay. Inspiring, and the message that you said, it really is empowering for so many young people, but also Molly and myself as well. Molly, what about yourself?
Wow, Finlay, that first quote from you, where you said it just makes such a difference having a voice. And I loved how confident you went in with that. And I think a lot of us, I mean, particularly myself, I've struggled with this, gaining a voice from not having one, and then also the power that comes with that. which is obviously important for ourselves, but then when going into leadership positions or in ambassador roles like ourselves, sometimes I feel guilty that I have a voice, and I know that so many other young people and children don't have it. So I think that was a really a good quote from you and something I'll definitely take forward with me. But in terms of what's inspired for me to have a voice, so my younger self, similar to Finlay, I think all people that are creating systems change or advocating clearly have a lived experience where they didn't have a voice or participation at some point in their life. So again, similar to Finlay, I didn't have a voice growing up. Decisions were made without me, about me, through family court, and I'm glad that Finlay is someone that is advocating for children and people like myself that went through that now. I was taught through that I needed to stay quiet, to shrink, and taught that I shouldn't hold space for myself. And so through that, I was obviously systematically silenced, and my rights were stripped from the day I was born. So I didn't even have a choice over like, wait a second, let me, you know, where is my voice? It wasn't until I was 21 that I started to reclaim my voice and my power and realize that I did have it all along, which is really scary because obviously I've managed to get myself out of that place, but not everyone has the resources or strength to do so, and we know that. Um, and I'd also like to say that growing up, I grew up to leave a community, my community, as opposed to stay within it and feel like an actor, a key part of it. So now that's what inspires me, and that's what inspired me to do national work originally through campaigning on loneliness, because I realised it was a systemic, wide issue and it wasn't just me, and no one was really speaking loud enough about it. So that's how I started with the national voice part, which was back in 2021, and that was when I became an ambassador. And obviously now continuing as co-chair is obviously a huge national role and a huge role within a national community, which I'm very grateful for. But I think whilst that is really empowering, and a lot of people will look up to that and want to become that one day, which I hope everyone has a chance to, I also know, and if you're listening to this, that if you are local and you're feeding into local community, like don't compare local to national, because actually I believe that local voices matter most. That is where the real place-based work happens. I mean, we've seen that with Blackpool and Ipswich through I Will. And if you feel small, you're not. You're actually much, you're part of a much bigger ecosystem. And I wish that I actually had the local community as opposed to the national one. And I'm sure that all of us in this room can emphasize on that and like empathize with it around as ambassadors, like we're all across the country, which is an amazing, network to have, but also we don't get to see each other very often. And so whilst we know we're leading on national change, each of us, what's really important is when you come together as a local community in a place. And so that's definitely something that I'm interested in getting back into, and obviously leading on that in as co-chair as well.
Wow, so, so inspiring. And the work that you do, Molly, is absolutely incredible. And rightly so, you just said about like and community and building that community together as and us ambassadors. And we are very much like everywhere, like Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland. And I think and we come together as a community to make a difference, and it's just so empowering, and you are going to be so amazing as co-chair in the next 2 years. Like you really are going to bring so much change, but also bring us guys ambassadors with you in order to make that change. And so what is one positive thing in your journey, and what has been one negative an experience that you face having a voice, Molly?
Yeah, this question, wow. I would say the positive, like I've kind of mentioned already, is that reclaiming my voice has been incredibly liberating. Um, and I've found a lot of solidarity within it, not just within my own experiences and finding similar experiences and knowing that I'm not the only one, but also through other means and other solidarity movements and understanding that it's all connected. And I think to be able to uncover that as a human is really difficult, particularly in today's society, and like actually confronting issues in an intersectional lens. So I think that's definitely been liberating, not only for myself, but my own learning and unlearning. And I'm really proud of myself for doing that because it takes a lot of effort. And I've really enjoyed the freedom and the empowerment. And when I talk about empowerment, I often want people to focus on the power part. Obviously, empowerment's a process. You go from being powerless to then feeling heard and seen. But I'm particularly interested in the fact that what goes on beneath that, it's, the power within yourselves. You feel really confident. When you have power, you feel like you can go and achieve something with other people, which I think is a really important part, which is collaboration. And then you just have the power to go and do something. And so for me, I've definitely felt that transformation the past few years, and that's been really positive, and I know that's changed my life for the better. And I think as well, the way that I've tried to do this throughout the last, how many years, but trying to be relational with liberation. So by that I mean obviously not just feeling liberated within myself, but trying to share that with others and trying to help others find that liberation too. And that's something I'm really proud of, to be like more a relational person. And I think it makes sense to why loneliness affected me so much, because I clearly am a relationship person and want to bring people with me and make sure that no one gets left behind. So that's been a really positive part of the journey. A negative part, I think this will actually, I want to say this a lot more than I currently do, and it's been a process over the last few months, particularly around um, becoming co-chair. That for me, a lot of people won't realize, but actually, when I found out, I was really upset and really sad, actually, and I cried for weeks. Um, and that's not to say I wasn't grateful, wasn't happy that I became co-chair, but it was actually the identity side of it and the identity crisis that comes with it, and how when you're put into such a big leadership position, you obviously then are assumed to have power. And we know that socially, power isn't necessarily a great thing. It hasn't been good in history. We've seen that with the infringement of rights of many different people and communities. And I just don't want to be that person. So I think it didn't sit well with me at first. And also as someone with some quite difficult lived experiences, it just, that internalization of power and like having a voice really struck a chord there. So I think, yeah, back in summary of that point, I think I've really struggled with people making assumptions about who I am based on my national identity and the I will identity. And that's something that I'm trying to kind of dissect within the co-chair role, and both within myself and Henry, but also with the wider community that we have, and to show that you don't just turn up to an I will event and say like your social action, but you're actually more than that. You're a much more whole person than that. And I want to know what makes you laugh. I want to know what memes you've got on your phone. I want to know what songs you listen to. I love that side of being a human and sharing that, commonality. So yeah, that's what's kind of been difficult for me. But I hope by being raw and honest in this episode, particularly with in the lead up to I Will Week, like what do you stand for? That's what I'm standing for with myself, is trying to rewrite my identity and like say no when I don't feel comfortable.
Absolutely. And just so amazing how you just said that. And I think, and by being honest in this episode, really, I think it's so important, and to what you stand for. And you're absolutely going to be an amazing and co-chair, and never lose sight on that, because I know it can be very hard, when you're up to like that and big leadership thing. You really are going to bring our movement and together in that, to bring us ambassadors. And I think your positive and your negative journey really does make a big impact in your social action, but in general. Thank you, Molly, for sharing. Finley, what about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Troy. And not only does it have an impact, Molly, but it resonates. It resonates with me. I'm sure it resonates with Troy, and I'm sure it resonates with everyone that listens to this. I really kind of struggle to think of just one positive, just one negative, because it's a continuum, it's a spectrum, it's a journey. We come across things that sometimes we look forward to, sometimes we come across things that we don't expect, and being able to narrow it down to one for each is very difficult. But the first one of the most important ones to me, and it kind of relates to some of the things that Molly talked about, and that's the people. One of the biggest positives that I've had is meeting other young people, who, again, who sometimes are like-minded, but who other times come from very different circumstances, very different lived experiences and lived realities. And being able to meet these people from all over the country, and in some cases all over the world, has been so inspiring. It's been so, it's shifted the way that the perspective that I have, with which I look at the world, and the way that I look at issues. And so I'm really grateful to that. It's kind of related to that. I'm really grateful for the places that my social action has taken me. Coming from a really rural community, the world, you seem such a small part in a small part of the world, and to be able to visit the places where decisions are made, where decisions have impact. And that's not to say that they don't have impact on a local basis, but they have an impact on everyone. And being able to have that experience, and to be able to travel, and to be able to leave my home while also feeling connected to it, and while representing it, has been something that's been a really positive experience for me. But I'd be lying if I said that all the experiences that I have had been positive, and that every room that I've went into, in some function, one of the hats that I use when I carry out my social action. But I'd be lying if I said that every single one has been a positive space, that every single one has been inclusive, that every single one, my voice has been valued. And following on from that discussion, steps have been taken in order to, whether it's to implement the voices of young people that have been in that space, or to action any actions that have been created. I'd be lying if I said those things were true every single time. I think that's been one of my negative experiences, that that this is something that still happens when there is so much information about what good practice is when it comes to youth participation, what good practice is when it comes to having young people on boards in the form of young trustees, what good practice is when it comes to including everyone and making sure everyone feels included, heard, and listened to. And so, that's been one of my positive or negative experiences. But, having said that, I'm fortunate enough to have been able to take those negative experiences and turn them into positive experiences by taking, the tough lessons, by taking that sometimes awful experience, and saying and sharing and giving reflections on that. I think eventually that will in itself will have an impact, and hopefully turn some of those negative spaces into positive and inclusive spaces.
Well said, Finlay. Thank you for sharing, because you are right. And the positives can be negative, but it can actually make more positives, more better. And I think we are learning and growing in our social action and making a difference. So thank you so much. And so what are the key issues you think young people are facing right now? Finlay.
Gosh, yeah, what a question. I think it's always important to reflect on, what issues actually are important to young people. And, when answering this, I think, it's important to start by saying that young people are very diverse. No young person is going to have the same issues which are important to them. And I think that's really important to reflect on that. And I know that Molly and I won't be able to cover every single issue that every young person thinks is important, but hopefully we hit a few of the key ones on the head. I think one of the biggest things, at the moment, and it's particularly important given the current discourse, in the democracy space, relates to our news and how we receive information. And I think in relation to that, one of the biggest issues, perhaps for young people at the moment, is how do we access this information? How do we know that this information is true and reliable and safe? How is that expressed? And I think, as a young person, I've become so normalized to seeing bias within my media that it has become so frustrating. I think, we're the generation that has maybe witnessed the slow death of objectivity within media, and looking at things in a way that assesses all aspects of certain situations. And that's been so frustrating to observe, and to know that it will be having an impact in the way that people look at other people's issues, and the way that people relate to other people, for instance, within their communities. How do people feel that they relate to others? And I think that's such a huge issue that needs to be addressed. I think both you and I, Troy, I know that we've talked about this in the past, and I'm sure Molly certainly is as well. But I know that we're both very passionate about ensuring that people have access to equal opportunities, and whether that's in relation to discussions around young people with additional support needs or special educational needs. I think that continues to be an issue. In my role as a panel member, it's we've got to make decisions, which are, in the best interest of a young person. That sometimes, has to consider what services can do for that young person. And, I think we're in a situation at the moment where services, whether that's youth work services, whether that's health services, whether that's services, like that provide support for young people with neurodiversities. I think, we're in a situation where these services are so limited that we're stuck. And I'm sure that, that's an issue that resonates with many young people. And to name a kind of third issue, because I could probably go on forever in relation to this one, but I think an issue that kind of is the culmination of and consequence of both the ones that I've talked about, is that there's so much uncertainty in the future at the minute, and uncertainty in the world. To think about, what, life could look like this time next year, or this time in 5 years, is so challenging to think about. I don't think there's been a point where it's been so uncertain, and whether it's looking at things like AI, and how that's going to change the world, both for good and for bad. Whether it's looking at things like democracy, and the international relations that exist within the world. It's concerning to see that it is so uncertain, because you'd hope you'd be able to look at things and go, that is, this is going to be a change for good. Of course, which the I Will movement, is very much a part of, and a part of, kind of creating that light in the darkness, almost. But we need more hope.
Absolutely agree. And there's good key issues. Thank you, Finlay. What about you, Molly?
Yeah, well, I think Finlay did very well, particularly in the beginning, Finlay, when you said we wouldn't be able to capture every issue, because you're right. Young people are individuals. They all have their own intersectional and personal lived experiences. But I mean, yeah, my question is, what aren't young people facing, as opposed to what are they facing? I mean, look, we've seen poverty, racism, present day colonialism, in my view, education, lacking, equitable opportunities, failing to be able to achieve that after you've gone and, got a degree or an education, which is just horrendous. But yeah, they're all systemic, and all interlink and often run in cycles. So yeah, I think Finley's right in the fact that now is a really hard time, but hope is really important. And just one more point on that, I think the biggest barrier to then dismantling those issues, and like I said, they're all intersectional. I think one of the biggest barriers is the fact that those that are in power, which, as we know, are often adults, they don't have to be a particular person, but just typically adults, they view themselves as different to young people. And I mean, we're guilty of this as well. We do say young people and children, and obviously there are labels that need to be had to then give rights to those people. But I think too much of that rhetoric means that then adults see themselves as completely different to children and young people, when they're forgetting that they're also living this life for the first time. And actually, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they were also that child. And that really scares me, because they've forgotten their inner child. They've forgotten, playing on swings, learning something for the first time, not having a voice themselves, which a lot of adults would have had. And as a result, becoming an adult, often they've hoarded the power and the resource, and they've excluded voices of young people, because they've othered themselves so much. And I think that's one of the key barriers. I think if we could really work on that and somehow dismantle that and bring inner child healing to everyone, and a lot of adults, particularly those in power, the elites in society, I think the world would be a lot different, and we could actually tackle some of those systemic issues at the root. But yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Molly, for that. And thank you, guys. And so to finish this episode, with this theme's Our Week, what we stand for, what resonates to you with your journey? Molly.
Wow. I mean, the topic this year, what do you stand for, is just incredible. I think it was built by ambassadors as well, and I can really tell the difference, the fact that it has been. And I think it's so topical for what we just discussed about. And it's such an intersectional topic. And I love how in Iowa Week there's a theme every single day. So there will be something for everyone. But for me personally, the day that I'm most looking forward to, the topic that within this is community. And I don't think that will be surprising to both of you or those that are listening, but it really resonates with me. Personally, I'm an estranged person, and I've been quite nomadic throughout my life, so moving across the place, even though I didn't really want to. And I really struggled to find belonging. No wonder why I felt lonely in my early adulthood. And as I said earlier, community, I wanted to escape community, not to stay within it. And so for me, the one place I've felt community that has been omnipresent and sort of existing no matter where I am in life has been I Will and has been with the young people within the youth sector. So it's something that's really built me up from the root, miraculously, despite experiencing such adversity and really not having much hope. But I think as well, community is vital for well-being, is vital for compassion, and I think when we have real safe community, we're able to open ourselves up to dialogue and empathy and collective action, and then this creates that place-based systemic change, which we're all really passionate about. So yeah, and I also believe, controversial opinion, that we should be able to challenge communities as well. It's not all about making good. I think a good, thriving, expansive community also is open to changing and adapting, and I think it needs to be with the current way that life is going. So yeah, that's me. But what about you, Finlay?
Yeah, oh, gosh, I'm going to steal part of your answer because it's so amazing and I totally resonate with it. And I think one of the biggest elements of this year's theme that also relates with me is community. For similar and slightly different reasons, and that it's been so frustrating to see the discourse over the past couple months and over the past year of identity and what it means to be a part of a community, a part of a nation. And I think, by realizing what we stand for and what are some of the strengths of our communities and, bringing people together and making a difference and making positive change and making our communities sustainable. And I think, that will really help us kind of look to these core questions that are part of the central discourse at the moment. And look to these things and say, these are the good things about our communities. These are the things that we should all strive to be. These are the things that we should want to see and want to be and want to become. And I think particularly with this year's themes, there's a really big opportunity for this to set up of a domino effect, a snowball effect that hopefully, we can see, right across the country and, not just within the youth sector, but in every sector, in the way that we connect with our communities and reflect on our relationships within those communities.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. Such amazing conversation on today's TFG Summit Month episode. And so thank you for coming on and to celebrate Iowa Week and coming up on the 17th of November up to the 21st of November. And that's it for today's episode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Troy.
Please support the podcast by subscribing and rating the podcast. I'd love to hear what you like and what could be better for future episodes. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram and iwill.troy and also on X, iwill_Troy. Tune in to next week's episode.